Good morning. The plan is to visit a number of places of interest outside the city. This is the day to make it happen.
Like any city of 4 million people, Baku can be a bear to get around in. The difference here is that once you get to its periphery, you can disappear into the desert rather quickly. Within an hour's drive, you can be in the middle of nowhere. One of our first stops to visit a rare geologic area of so-called mud volcanoes is so rugged, we've had to abandon our van and pile into four-wheel drive vehicles to get there.
Well, we made it to the top of the hill, to a phenomenon that shouldn't be surprising in a country like Azerbaijan, where there's an abundance of natural gas and oil fields. But these are mud volcanoes, so-called because they're cones that develop on these ridgetops, which gases are released and mixed with other elements, including mud, to form something approximating a little lava flow, but it's harmless. These mud eruptions are not even hot. You can touch them with your bare hands, and they're cool. So in that way, it's different than what most people think of when they think of a mud pot. It's not spewing, boiling material. Very, very cold, and supposedly very good for the skin. I'm waiting for you to rub it all over your face.
No, we are not going to do that.
The road coming up here was really rough. In fact, we had to get out of our regular minivan into one that had a higher chassis to get up here, and some of our group rode up in Ladas, the old Russian car, taxis, because the road was just too rough to accommodate the regular van. Well, let's take a look at this one that looks to be among the tallest of the mud volcanoes on the property. And here's what it looks like. Barely gurgling, but you sort of wonder if there are times of the day when that slight gurgle turns into something more.
Not today, anyway. Once back at the highway, it isn't far to a phenomenon of another kind, a band of hills that's home to one of the world's largest collections of ancient petroglyphs.
Gobustan is one of the most famous petroglyph areas on Earth. It is a 6,000 hectare landscape containing roughly 5 rocky hills on which petroglyphs have been recorded since prehistoric times up through the Middle Ages. Scientists from around the world have learned much from it. Of course, this is not only a national park in Azerbaijan, but it has long been a World Heritage Site.
is pretty much crawling with tourists. It is a busy place in the middle of nowhere, outside the city, about an hour, in a very sparsely populated, arid region that looks nothing like the immediate area around Baku. This place was not discovered until a local miner stumbled into a cave at a point just outside where I'm walking in 1939. From then on, excavation and restoration has proceeded at rather a slow pace until the turn of this century. There are many, many petroglyphs of people hunting, people gathering, people engaged in what appear to be religious worship of the sun and so forth. But there are also more recent petroglyphs, and I'm referring particularly to one rock here that has a Latin inscription that pertains to Emperor Domitian's reign toward the end of the 1st century CE. It was apparently left by members of the Roman legion during their temporary stay on the shores of the Caspian Sea here.
The peninsula on which Baku sits is known as the Land of Fire because of several natural gas fires that have blazed continuously, some of them for many centuries. The most famous of these is Ganar Dagh, or Burning Mountain.
There's so much natural gas pouring from the rocks in the immediate vicinity that even the surface of streams near this hillside can be set on fire by striking a match. The streams may be calm, but they're referred to as Ganar Dagh, the Azerbaijani word for burning springs. Like standing next to someone who's barbecuing 2 feet away. Only a handful of places such as this exist in the world, and most of them are in Azerbaijan. Other similar places have been noted for many centuries. That's one reason why Zoroastrianism was prominent in Azerbaijan from the 2nd century forward until being pushed aside after the Arab Caliphate brought Islam here in the 7th and 8th centuries.
Ganar Dagh is a scientific oddity, but the nearby ancient temple of Ateshgah was for centuries a place of devotion for fire-worshipping Zoroastrians and Hindus.
We circle back to another Baku suburb, to one of the more fascinating religious shrines you're apt to find anywhere. It's a castle-like religious temple built in the 2nd century, originally rebuilt in the 1700s, that was considered holy by both Zoroastrians and Hindus. So why this temple and why here? Well, it was built on the spot where fire once poured out from a vent in a natural gas field directly under this site. Of course, early worshippers had no scientific concept of what a gas field was and attributed what they saw to the supernatural. That's why this temple was constructed. As the 19th century petroleum boom accelerated, a strange thing happened here in about 1893. At that time, after a prolonged exploitation of oil fields in the immediate area, one day the flames just went out. The flames you see here today is piped in from a gas main in Baku city. Fires went out here in the 1890s. It triggered a religious shockwave among Zoroastrians who lost confidence in this facility as the holy place that they thought it was. They hence moved away. And with the coming of the Bolshevik Revolution, the entire structure became derelict. In fact, it was used by the Soviet army for several decades into the 20th century, until the 1960s, when, of all things, India's Indira Gandhi visited here, prompting a resurgence of interest in it and promoting it as a potential tourist attraction. And to many people's surprise, the Soviets took the bait, and this place began to be preserved once again. Eventually, 40 years later, or in about the year 2000 or so, it became designated as a World Heritage Site. Before there was this enclosed fortress, and before this place became essentially a caravanserai, housing the Zoroastrians who clustered here for several centuries. There was this temple, and I'm referring to the squared, four-sided temple that I'm standing inside. It's an open-air temple with arches on each of the four corners. And that's very important because it signified the four sacred elements of Zoroastrianism: earth, wind, fire, and water.
Next, from Azerbaijan, I travel near the border with Russia and the picturesque Silk Road mountain town of Shaki.